The CEO was in tears, I was a wreck, there was tension in the company, and it was just the most difficult time that we've gone through, I think, as a company. And so if you want to start a company, please remember this. You've seen them in movies, you've read them in books, you've heard them in stories, but today I'm going to give you the actual scoop, the actual truth of what it's like to run a multi-million-dollar startup. My name is Spencer, and I'm the 28-year-old COO of a startup that did $30 million in just 30 months. In this video, I'm going to tell you about some of the things that come along with bootstrapping a business all the way to $30 million. To make sure you get the most out of this video, make sure you stay till the end because I'm going to share with you two crucial things that I would use if I were going to start a startup today. And don't just skip to the end of the video because if you do, you might miss out on some of the context that will actually make you worse off than if you just watched the whole thing. So with that said, let's jump in. Like I mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer, the COO of a multi-million-dollar e-commerce company that got there in just a few months. My unique position gives me an interesting vantage point because I see everybody who's operating below me, which is the rest of the company, and the one individual who's my direct report, who is the CEO. This kind of puts me in like a command center where I can just see everything going on, so I can tell you from experience exactly what it's like to be in a startup from so many different positions. So what my goal is today is to give you a little bit of information about lots of different things in the startup so you understand if you want to start a company of your own, here's what you're going to walk into. Okay, so the workplace. What is the workplace like? Let's talk about the actual environment. You walk into a startup, what is it actually like? So the first thing you'll notice, which is kind of funny, is that lots of things are scattered. In our company, we have monitors here, tables there, and this is something you're going to notice just as a result of things constantly changing. Like for example, your desk might change 10 times. There's so much crazy stuff that happens that just don't get used to anything being in a specific spot because it is going to move. For example, there's that picture of Jeff Bezos when he's starting Amazon, that his desk is something like, it's on like a piece of plywood with two cinder blocks either side, and that's the guy's desk. And no, it's not that ghetto everywhere you go. Of course, things are going to get a little bit nicer. You're going to have more regiment to things, but to start in a startup, this is the way it's going to look, this is the way it's going to be. Just get used to it. Another thing about your environment is chairs. There's either too many or too few, always. You go into the boardroom and there's way too many. People can't even fit in there, there's so many chairs. Or you go in and there's one guy sitting in a chair and there's nowhere else to sit. So you just sit on the table or grab a chair from somewhere else or whatever. But chairs are something that you'll notice across startups. If you go to multiple or if you start multiple, you'll see this is an actual thing. This is an actual problem. So what about the people in a startup? What is that like? Well, to start off, you're going to make really good, probably lifelong friends. The people in a startup really do have a lot of ambition about them. They're really excited about things. There's lots of things, like I said, that are moving and changing. And so you begin to really associate with these people because you have so much in common so quickly. You guys are all on the same ship and all trying to steer in the same direction, all trying to row in the same direction. And that really does foster friendships quickly. But one interesting thing is because startups require so many different kind of minds and opinions, you'll notice that you start to associate with people who have vastly different interests personally, but professionally you get an exposure to these people because you guys have complementary skills that are required to bring the business forward. You will also see that a lot of people wear a lot of different hats. We'll have the same person doing email marketing, some design, some customer service, so many different things. This is the way it's going to start again, especially when it's a newer startup. Then you get to a point where, of course, people are a little bit more specialized. You know what you're doing, but to start, there's lots of different hats that you need to wear, and you're going to have to do a lot of different things and step up at different times. But unfortunately, there does come a time sometimes where people and positions become redundant. And that kind of leads us to the hiring and firing. Now, hiring is pretty funny. I know we have some people at our company who remember going through their interviews where they had one of the founders sitting across from them eating a bunch of food out of a plastic Tupperware while they were doing an interview. We have a lot of eccentric people. At startups, you need bizarre people because you're trying to do a bizarre thing. So you'll notice that even with the interviewing process, the hiring process, the firing process, both of those can be very strange. On the firing note, you will notice that sometimes people are not suited for the company or the company's not suited for them. Just like any other relationship, you're going in different directions and that's what's best for both parties. And so at startups, as the needs change, you will see that more people are brought on during times and more people are unfortunately let go. Now let's talk about arguably the most important factor of a startup, and that's cash. So for any of you guys who don't know what bootstrapping means, bootstrapping is when you don't really take outside funding. So you might start with $10, turn that into 15, turn that 15 into 30, turn that 30 into 100, so far and so forth through your operations, your product, your marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't necessarily think it's any more or less impressive if you've bootstrapped, if you haven't, because there's arguments both ways. Because if you have bootstrapped, obviously that's very impressive. It shows that you're resourceful. But if you haven't bootstrapped and you have funding, it requires another level, a higher level of strategy to really use that funding properly. And that's not even to mention the difficulty of actually going and pursuing funding. That's a whole beast in and of itself. Now, the second thing about cash in a startup is that you will go through, I would say, 3 to 10 phases of feeling comfortable with your cash, only to realize that your understanding needs to evolve. You think you know what you're taking in and what's going out, but really until you actually have experience handling these things, you'll learn that you didn't know what you were talking about last month. And that's where something beautiful comes in, which is called projections. Instead of just letting things happen somewhat randomly and trying to do the best you can with them, working on strong projections can give you a roadmap that you're trying to follow to continue to increase your success. I cannot stress enough how important it is to get to the point in your company where you are beginning to make projections and sticking to them. So you actually know when you've had a good month, a good year, so on and so forth. Now, the fourth thing in the cash section that I'll talk about here is raises and promotions. You can definitely have some pitfalls. You can want to give somebody a raise or promotion just because, they think they did a good job. I know what it feels like to want to just give someone more money because they did a great job, but you can't just throw out raises willy-nilly. If you just throw them out, then people will expect that every single time they do their job properly and correctly, that they're then going to get a raise, which is obviously going to eat into a lot of cash resources in the business. And so make sure if you're running a startup that you're being conservative with your raises. You're giving them when they're due, but try and have a time of year that you give raises and your employees understand here is the time that they should pitch to you why they want a raise. That way, everyone can expect when raises happen. You can project it on your cash flow, and you don't need to waste time talking about it or having those awkward little conversations where someone's coming to you at a time that's not the predetermined time to ask for a raise. With that, let's jump into the next category of kind of what it's like to be in a startup. The next one is meetings. This is a pretty funny one. There's lots of books written about how shitty meetings are in general and how to run better meetings, but I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how meetings work at a startup. First off, there's either always too many or too few. Now, in the case that there's too many, you gotta think about it in terms of if you're running the company and you're paying all these employees, when you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them in a room, think about how expensive that 1/2 hour, that 1 hour is that they're meeting if that meeting is either redundant or wasteful. So when there's too many meetings, not only are you paying for this redundancy because you're paying the salary of everybody in there, but you're also wasting time that you could have been using towards actually working and getting something done. But on the flip side, sometimes you have too few, which means some stakeholders in certain projects are left out. So ask yourself when you're having meetings if they're pointless or not. Go through the Google Calendar or whatever calendar system you use and look at when your employees are meeting and seeing, is this actually that valuable? Is there any way we can maybe condense this into 30 minutes or even 15 instead of a whole hour-long meeting with all hands? Find your meeting rhythm. A certain amount of time every week, every quarter, every day, whatever it is that you guys meet that's not wasteful or too seldomly, so that you guys can get together and actually solve problems if needed. And so to do this, you have to set rules. So some rules that might be suggested are only meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Any meeting that requires less than 30 minutes could potentially just be written down and sent as a memo. In order to have meetings, there has to be a set agenda that every single attendee is able to read prior so everyone is prepared. So lastly, we'll get to the 5th point I want to discuss, and that is culture. I kind of like to define it as this unsaid system of rules and practices and processes that lead to the employees and the business itself being a happy business, but also one that's very productive and encouraging. Now, you'll see in a startup that there's culture events, at least there should be. The point of this is to get outside of work and do things with the people you actually work with and get to know them more personally, because that comes back into the office and you guys begin to grind and have that camaraderie in a way you wouldn't have had if you just came in every single day, clocked in, said, hey, how are you doing? And then clocked out. It's also a way to celebrate big wins that the company has. The next part about culture is a common language. So it's speaking in a certain way where you might have inside jokes, you might have certain things that you guys talk about that again, encourages that camaraderie and encourages that people decide to put their energy here. And so language is a big part of that. For us, for example, we have this thing at the company that's a fist bump. Everyone knows what a fist bump is, but for us, it's held sacred. And so what I mean is that, we're in about a 22,000 square foot warehouse. And if someone on one end of the warehouse shows a fist bump, then you got to come from the other end of that warehouse and better honor that fist bump. That's just a little symbol of encouragement that everybody gives everybody every single morning, every single day, every single evening when they're leaving. It's so important. It might not seem like a big deal, but having these little symbols and signals of strong culture really does create that strong culture. And then the last thing I'll say about culture is that some of it, like the fist bump, is intentional, but some of it is just organic. Sometimes we just wait and we see who are the cool people that are part of our company and what do they bring? What elements do they bring to the culture and what can we enshrine in the company culture that comes from each one of these individuals to really build it organically? And so guys, those are the main things I really wanted to talk to you guys about, to give you guys a perspective of some of the things that go into being in and running a startup. Startups in general are just incredibly rewarding, especially if you have a role that allows you to see so much and be a part of so much. But ultimately, you might not be the right person for a startup if you don't enjoy being in an incredibly fast-paced environment that requires a lot of learning a lot of the time. It requires adaptability and it requires being results driven. Really, that's how you're evaluated. And because there's generally speaking so few of you, it's very easy to know who's doing what and where people are going wrong. Obviously, there's so much more to be said about startups. I'm sure I'll make more videos about this in the future. And if you guys want me to do that, please just leave me a comment and I'll absolutely make that. But as our company and myself as an executive are both continuing to grow daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, obviously so will our experiences, which I will continue to share with you guys. But I wanted to make this because not that many companies reach the point that we're at. And so I really wanted to give you guys the inside scoop of what it's like to be in a startup that's actually successful. Finally, I wanted to congratulate you on getting this far in the video. As promised from the beginning, here are the two crucial things that I would always make sure I remembered if I was starting a startup today. Number one, like I mentioned to begin with, is obsess over your financials. Always make sure to understand your finances. It sounds so boring, but it is so important. Your financials tell a story. And listen, if you speak the language of your financials, it's a really good story. But if you don't speak the language, it's just like watching any movie where you don't speak that language, you're going to get lost. Not understanding financials has been written on many tombstones from many failed companies. The second crucial thing that I would remember is create 90-day goals, quarterly goals. At the beginning of the quarter, you pick what you're trying to tackle for those 90 days. It doesn't really matter what stage you're at. Of course, when you get a little bit bigger, you might set even bigger goals, but to start, especially in a startup or right before you have a successful startup, set 90-day goals. Even when we bring people on, we set 90-day plans for them, which a lot of companies do, set 90-day plans so you know exactly what this new employee is looking to do for the company in 90 days, and you get an opportunity to tie that back to the overall 90-day goal and make sure that this new employee actually makes sense. Because you never quite know how far off you are if you don't set a target. So set that target both for the company and for the people joining the company and start your analysis and work there. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Spencer with the Must Become channel, and I will see you in the next one.